Good evening, everybody. Thank you for hopping on to our webinar about digital exposure and recruiting during the NCAA dead period with the Head First team here. Before we jump into the content for the evening, here's a quick look at the agenda of what we're going to talk about on this webinar. We'll do some quick introductions to who you'll be hearing from and about on this webinar tonight. Then we'll talk about the status of high academic recruiting, how it has, kind of looking backwards at the last few months and seeing how it has changed and what has changed about it, how it's developed during this dead period and during the pandemic, how student athletes can prepare for this and what you can do as a family right now and through this fall and winter to prepare for or finalize or get started in the recruiting process, regardless of your grad year. We'll spend a lot of time talking about coach communication as well, obviously a really crucial piece of the recruiting process, especially now when more things are more remote and more kind of less face-to-face access. And then we're going to take as much time as we need at the end here for a live Q&A to make sure that we get all of your questions answered. You should see in the GoToWebinar toolbar a question tab. You can fire away questions in there as they come up over the course of the evening. If anything comes up that you have a question about, just fire it away in there. I'll be collecting those questions for that Q&A portion towards the end of the evening. In addition to those topics that we're going to talk about, I also want families and student athletes who are attending this to be thinking through these themes that you see on your screen as well. These themes are what we think are some of the main keys to success right now, and really some of the guiding principles behind what you might be doing this spring, or how you might be, or this winter rather, or how you might be communicating with coaches. So thinking about the role of effective coach communication and what that looks like, how that has changed given everything going on, but how you can still continue to make strides. The role of video and data and how crucial and central that has become in this new recruiting landscape. And then a really key one that we'll touch on explicitly at some points, but also just kind of suffusing throughout this entire presentation, is proactivity and really attacking this recruiting process no matter where you are in it or what might be next for you. Just thinking, how can I be proactive in all facets of the game right now? So before we turn into that content, I'd love to give some quick intros to our team. Jed, could you give yourself a quick introduction, please?
And Max. Hello, everybody. My name is Jed Barkin. I am an associate of marketing and customer experience here with Head First. I'm originally from Georgia and was recruited to go and play baseball at Denison University in Ohio, where I both played and was an assistant coach on the team as well. Once I graduated from Denison, I first interned with Head First as an operations intern in our honor roll showcase camps. Upon completion of that summer, I started full-time with Head First as a leadership fellow in September of 2018, and about a year later, I stepped into the current position that I'm in now.
Awesome. Thank you, Jed. And for better or for worse, you have the distinct pleasure of hearing from two former or retired Head First interns tonight. My name is Max McKenna. I'm a senior manager of marketing and customer experience here at Head First within our showcase division. I went to Amherst College, where I graduated in 2011, where I played my college baseball. After my playing career in college, I went into teaching and coaching at the high school level at a couple of private schools in the Northeast. First as a teaching fellow in history and assistant baseball coach at Phillips Andover Academy up in Massachusetts, and then head baseball coach and a full-time history instructor at the Master's School, which is a small private boarding school outside New York City. Like Jed, I started at Head First as an intern. For me, it was a few years ahead of him. I interned for Head First in the showcase division doing honor roll related operations in 2010 and 2011 while I was in college, and then came back full-time to the company 6.5 years ago now in the summer of 2014. And since that time have really had the great pleasure of working really closely with this division and with families like yours and student athletes like those who are on this webinar to really continue to deliver the opportunities that I know I needed going through my recruiting process to make sure that everybody has the knowledge, the opportunities, and the structure that they need to take full advantage of what's coming up for them. Now we're going to dive into the status of high academic recruiting. And we separated this into two portions. The first is kind of a timeline of what is changing, what has changed, and then there's also the new tools of recruiting. So first up is this timeline. Once the pandemic hit and there was the initial implementation of this NCAA Division I dead period, I'm calling this period March to June. Of note is these timeframes and also the way that different programs were looking at this at that time is a bit fungible and certainly depends a little bit on, it varies from program to program, but by and large, what we saw with a lot of our partner programs in this March to June timeframes is coaching staffs had just had their seasons cut short, unfortunately. They were in this new dead period. They went into a bit of a wait and see mode to see how things would develop over the coming months before the crucial summer recruiting months. So at first there was a little bit of a pause. They were still corresponding with some student athletes. They were still certainly getting and watching video on players, but they were a little bit kind of sheltered to see, okay, when are things going to open up and how can I think about in the coming months how I might advance my recruiting for my incoming classes. As the dead period extended first to the end of June and then to the end of August and now through the end of the year, this June to August timeframe, it became pretty clear to a lot of coaches who were looking to hit the recruiting trail that things weren't going to open back up for them in a timely fashion. And so with that in mind, they started to really adapt their recruiting resources and recruiting efforts to the digital front. Thinking more about video and data and how are they emailing with prospective student athletes and all that. And in this June to August timeframe, they were thinking about how are they transitioning their coaching staff resources to this digital front, and they were building a comfort with the tools and with that communication chain with players, which obviously looked very different than it has in previous years. They're adapting and building comfort with these new tools and with this kind of new landscape of recruiting for prospective student athletes. Once they adapted and transitioned their resources and built some level of comfort, what we have seen with most of our partner programs from August to the present is that they are moving at or very close to their regular recruiting pace, especially for 2021s and 2022s. So even though this kind of started with a pause to some degree to kind of see how things would shake out, once coaches and coaching staff adapt to this new landscape, from August on, we've really seen them accelerate and are making recruiting decisions off some of these new tools that, they don't have access to what they usually would, but they are still making recruiting decisions on 2021s and 2022s and, building out their recruiting list for underclassmen at or near the regular pace as they would be in a typical year, just using a whole host of different information available to them. Before we dive into what some of those tools are, I think it would be kind of demonstrative and illustrative. Jed, could you talk a little bit about your recruiting process and kind of what it looked like to set the stage for what it looked like a couple of years ago, and then the kind of that works into how things have changed and are changing. So could you give the quick rundown of your recruiting process from Atlanta, Georgia to Denison University?
I certainly can. So for me, my process, I like to think it started when I was about like 15, 16 years old with the development piece of things. I had some really, really good coaches. I was really fortunate, and, we worked a lot at perfecting my on-the-field craft. And, as I was playing for this team, there were certainly coaches out there, and I wasn't necessarily getting the exposure to the types of schools that, I was potentially interested in playing for at the next level. And so I did end up switching teams to really an organization that was focused on the high academic schools in general. It was the East Cobb Patriots is who I ended up playing for. And so making that switch over was important for me to do, and it, eventually did end up working out for me. I gained a mentor along the way in Jim Lovejoy, who was helpful and, helping give me the insight into my own play and areas that I needed to improve upon. And, for me personally, it was speed. And so I was fortunate enough to be able to go to a trainer and begin working on that. I had put together a recruiting video and was reaching out to various schools as well with academic and athletic and video information. And then in leading into the summer of my senior year, I was in a showcase where Coach Deegan saw me play ended up taking a visit to Denison, and in October of my senior year of high school, I ended up committing to Denison. So that was a snippet of how my process went personally.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Jed. And there's a couple things in there that I think do set the stage. One thing that Jed said that I think I've heard a lot from a lot of student athletes, and that we really believe about the recruiting process, is the typical travel ball circuit for high academic kids. The typical travel ball circuit doesn't necessarily serve you with the recruiting efficiency or the targeted exposure that you're generally looking for, right? Jed was fortunate enough to find a team that focused on the high academic piece. For a lot of kids who are targeting high academic schools, it means kind of striking out on your own sometime to find the right exposure to the right schools, which is quite honestly why Head First exists. Going to those massive tournaments that play down at Lake Point is a great way to be seen by some great big Division I schools if you're that kid throwing 92. If you're the kid with a 3.9 GPA and a 14.20 who is not looking at Ole Miss but is looking at Haverford, Swarthmore, and Williams, it's tougher for them to find you. And so I think that need for targeted exposure is something that we really do believe in. The other piece that segues really directly into this kind of what I'm calling the quote-unquote new tools is video has always been a piece of the puzzle. Jed mentioned he had a showcase video. I had a showcase video way back in 2006 or 7 or whenever that was. I was old enough that I had to send it out on DVD. I had to burn DVDs and send out copies of that instead of just uploading it to YouTube. That dates me a little bit. But the point of this is video is one of these quote-unquote new tools that coaches are really heavily relying on right now in recruiting. It's not a new tool. It just has really, really come to the forefront in their remote efforts. So when we think about how have coaches transitioned, we mentioned in the last slide, coaches have transitioned their resources and their efforts to the digital front. A lot of that is informed by video. And so when coaches are looking at video on prospective student athletes, they're looking at two different types generally. They have that recruiting showcase video, the bullpen that you throw if you're a pitcher with no live hitter, the defensive showcase reps that you take at shortstop if you're an infielder, not in a live game, the BP session that you film from a couple different angles. That's kind of that showcase video, and it gives coaches a good view into your fundamentals and your techniques and your mechanics, and to some degree your kind of tools at your position. There's also live game footage, and live game footage I think can be really useful to coaches because it shows how you run the bases, or how you do against live pitching, or how your curveball looks when it's actually thrown to a hitter instead of just to a catcher with nobody standing in the box. And so it gives coaches a better view of how your skills translate to the game ultimately, because that's what's important. Throwing 92 doesn't necessarily get anybody out unless you can do it effectively. And that live game footage is what can help coaches build that translation from tools to effectiveness in games. What can be tough about live game footage, and mom and dad, we love you, and the iPhone footage at the games is great. And I think that this year more than ever, I've been really encouraging parents to get some of that. The difficulty with that to some degree is that college coaches don't know how to benchmark the level of competition, right? That double that you just hit in the gap could have been off a kid who's committed to Mississippi State and is throwing 92, or it could be off of, a 15U reliever who just got his first appearance in the 16U game or 17U game at that tournament because he just got called up or something, or probably somewhere in between. And so I think that, giving coaches a way, communicating when you send that video, giving them a way to benchmark the level of competition is a good way to have them be more able to translate your live game footage into how it translates to their level. Now, one key thing about this video, coaches are doing more and more of their recruiting over video because they have to. They are forced by the circumstances, whether it's university-specific travel restrictions or the Division I dead period. But they are making recruiting decisions off of video. It does not mean that they are just thinking, well, I'm 51% sure on this kid, so I guess I'm going to flip a coin and, yep, they're in my recruiting class, right? They still need to get as complete a view into you as a player as possible. they still need to be just as comfortable committing a kid in November of 2020 as they did in November of 2019 when they had all these different tools available to you. So when it comes to video, they're relying really heavily on these different contexts of video, that showcase video, the live game footage, and also other things like getting frequently updated video, giving a coach one video of your BP in August, and then one in September and one in November to show your development over the course of the season or as you train. So it's important to think about giving them the comfort level that they need to commit to as well. Another side of this in terms of the, again, new tools, email, old tool, but email plus is what I'm calling this one. They still want to communicate with their recruits, right? They have typically gotten a sense of comfort for who you are, what your personality is, what your culture fit might be on the team by exchanging some emails, talking on the phone with you, and then really whenever possible, meeting you face to face, coming to a showcase like Head First and interacting with you in the dugout, getting you on campus or at their prospect campus on campus to get to meet you face to face. Some of those tools are limited or in the Division I case have completely disappeared with the dead period. And so coaches are relying on other forms of digital communication to still get that sense of character and get that sense of culture fit. Things like setting up a Zoom call with the family or setting up a FaceTime between you and one of the sophomores on the team to get a sense of campus, or doing the virtual tour thing that I know is becoming, unfortunately, really popular and is probably here to stick around to some degree, or checking in your social media feeds or engaging with you on social media. The key point here is that even without the face-to-face interaction, coaches, again, still need to know and be comfortable with the character fit and the culture fit of the players that they're recruiting. And so to some degree, this is on you guys as players and as parents of players who are going to handle this communication. Players, it's on you to still communicate your true personality as much as possible and whenever possible through these digital means, demonstrating thoughtfulness and maturity and in the emails that you'll send, which we'll talk a lot about, engaging with them professionally as much as possible if you're doing the virtual campus tour with them or anything like that. Just think about, even with these digital touch points, building the comfort for the culture fit and giving coaches a sense of who you are, not just on the field with your skills, but also as a young adult and as a student athlete who would be, theoretically walking into their locker room and being an important contributor to the group of guys that they spend a lot of time with for the next 4 years. The other side of things that coaches have really placed some emphasis on in this recruiting cycle, and this is one that is more new, right? It's data and analytics. It's using advanced metrics and tools like Blast, Rapsodo, HitTrax, getting a sense of not just, okay, this kid hit the ball 95 miles an hour off the bat. How do I use Blast to get a sense of what that kid's swing looks like so that I know how he generated that exit velocity? Or I'm looking at his curveball and I'm thinking, that has some pretty sharp bite. I wonder what the spin rate is on that, or I wonder what the 3D model of that pitch would look like, the horizontal or vertical break. Using all these advanced tools to get not just a sense of how you look on video, but also some of the inputs that go into creating that video. And this is where these advanced tools can really pay dividends, because ultimately what they do is they give coaches even more insight into who you are as a player now, which gives them a better window into who you are becoming as a player and your projectability. The other side of this, and these are less new, but things like objective measurements like 60-yard dash, your just raw crow hop, overhand throwing velocity, and batted ball velocity. The way that I think about these objective measurements is these are kind of like the standardized testing of your baseball, right? These are the SAT or ACT of your baseball. If you can run a 6.860, great. That's that 1,500 that you get to put on your application. It doesn't necessarily say this kid plays really fast in games, but it says here is a tool. Here is a one-time performance. Here's a tool that indicates at top output, here is what Jed Barkin is capable of. The way that I've heard some coaches describe it is your day-to-day stats or what you do with your travel team or your high school team, that's your transcript, right? That's the work you put in, day out. That's the A's that you get in the hard course load. That's the day in, day out work that you generate. Then these data analytics, the exit velocity, the 60, the throwing velocity, these are the standardized tests that give, during a 3-hour period, here is Jed Barkin's maximum output. Here's Max McKenna's maximum output. These are both really important to get a sense of what your ceiling is as a player and what your projectability is as a player. But I think it's just important for players to understand, they are both important pieces of the puzzle, but they serve different functions for coaches who are looking at them. Now we're going to transition into what players can be doing this fall and winter. And Jed, I'd love to turn it over to you to kind of talk through for 22s, 23s, 21s who are working through this process. What are the things that they can be doing this fall and winter to continue to advance their recruiting?
Excuse me. So this fall and winter, I think, it's important to kind of think of the timeline that you're on, right now. Obviously this year's been different up until this point in time. And so now you have things that you can still be working on to improve, to, be able to have these conversations with coaches. I think first off, we can speak about the importance of the video and the data. I think that's just a really key component to make sure that you are working towards obtaining that this fall and winter. Making sure that you're able to get the right type of video and the live game footage to be able to share with coaches, I just think is a really important piece of the puzzle right now, because what it's going to allow you to do is really create this timeline. So what you can acquire right now in video and data is going to allow you to start painting this picture and providing timely updates as you continue improving and acquiring new footage, and really take this library of what you have from this fall and winter and just being able to show the progress over the course of time. And so I think, for example, an event like we have coming up, or a couple events that we have coming up, but we can start with the Showcase Plus that we have in Florida. It's going to provide that opportunity for you to receive the data from Rapsodo and Blast Motion during the offensive showcase, or Rapsodo during the pitching showcase, and also the video to go along with that. And then also the video from the gameplay side of things as well, and having it from a trusted source that, coaches do a lot of their recruiting from in general. So having that accessible and available to help you start painting this picture and this timeline is just really important. I would also take that and say, looking yourself in the mirror and saying, there's a few things that I do really well that I need to make sure that I continue to improve upon and make sure that I can stand out with those. And so picking an objective measurement, for me, it would have been my 60-yard dash. I'm not the biggest guy myself. And so I was not a home run hitter. Exit velocity wouldn't have been a tool that I would want to, promote myself on. And so it would have been for me more of my speed. And it's finding, whatever that tool is for you to make sure that you are able to stand out when you are communicating with coaches. And so my personal opinion, I would, recommend picking that objective measurement or a couple of them and have a plan and set a goal for yourself. And so that way you can track your progress over time, and you can tell your friends to make sure that you're holding yourself accountable as well and working towards achieving those goals. But really taking the time now to highlight some of your key components that you're going to be able to communicate with coaches on, I think is a really important piece to be concentrating on this fall and winter. And going into that and taking it a step further would be the coach communication piece in general. I think that is a point right now that should, hopefully you are doing it or have plans to begin doing it as well. I think that this time of year, this fall, this winter, there's just a really logical timeline, as I was saying earlier, to allow yourself to either begin to have these conversations or provide timely updates on things like your objective measurements that you're working on with updated video and live gameplay footage for these coaches. It can be academic as well in terms of what you are reaching out to these coaches with, but you want to make sure that you are being persistent with these coaches. If you are interested in a particular school, you got to make sure you're using this time now to either be, establishing a relationship with those schools and introducing yourself and who you are to them, or if it's a coach that you may have had some communication with previously, you're providing them with those timely updates as well along the way. The personalization side of this is really crucial with these coaches as well. It's pretty easy to determine when there's a blanket email that's casted out to a lot of coaches. So making sure that you're really personal with that note that you are sending along to coaches. So something that we would recommend would be digging into that school and making sure you're genuinely expressing your interest. Why is it that you're interested in Johns Hopkins? Why is it that you're wanting to go play at MIT or Vanderbilt as another example? Whatever the school is, making sure that you're expressing that genuine interest is really important, and taking it a step further and having something that you want to be able to learn from the coach as you're reaching out. Have something that you want to be able to get out of that conversation. And another piece to just be concentrating on, of course, this fall and winter is the academic side of things. Standardized test prep, focusing in on the classroom. You got to make sure that you're able to keep all those doors open for schools that you might be interested in playing for at the next level. And so just making sure you can control what you can control, and certainly your efforts in the classroom is a really important piece of that.
And Jed, just to double down on a couple things you said. Firstly, about the objective measurements. So everybody on here knows, and college coaches know, that running a 6.760, for example, doesn't necessarily make you a recruitable player. It doesn't make you the best player just because you're the fastest. There's a lot of things that go into that piece of the puzzle. But when we talk about focus on one or two objective measurements to continue to improve on, it's going to help your game, right? If you're working on getting faster, you're going to get better at baseball. The main thing kind of above all this is keep working on your game of baseball and keep getting better at the game that you love. But the point of thinking about one or two objectives that you can really focus on is you need to find some reason, something on paper, before a coach knows anything else about you. What's the thing about you that is going to get them to say, that's interesting, I'm going to watch this kid's video, right? Because right now their inboxes are inundated with emails from prospective student athletes and a lot of video. And there's a lot of good players who might not get that video watched at some of their target programs. So the point of this is, if you focus in on a 60 or on your batted ball velocity or on your overhand throwing velocity, whatever it is that serves you as a student athlete the best, as a baseball player the best, use that to get a coach to say, I'm going to double click on this kid's profile and get a better look. And I think that's just really, right now, for better or for worse, it takes something to get your name highlighted by a coach before they're going to click in and watch all the other stuff about you. So focusing on what that thing is and using that to your advantage is something that I am preaching to student athletes that we work with.
Max, absolutely. And, taking that a step further is going to be the proactivity side of this. It's so important to make sure that you are taking ownership of this process yourself as the student athlete and getting your name out there to the coaches that you are interested in playing for at the next level. It's really the cheat code to all of this. It's making sure that you're either creating that school list if you don't have it set, or starting to put that plan together in general, making sure you're getting the video and the data that you need to make sure that you're maximizing what you're able to share with these schools and these coaches, and starting that process of communicating with them if you haven't done so already, or providing those timely updates. I think, something to think about is that everybody's kind of on that same level playing field right now. Just given this past year and the lack of opportunity to always get out in front of those coaches in person, everybody felt that same restriction. There weren't coaches that were able to go out certain places at the D1 level, for example. You couldn't go see them in California and not do it in New York, for just to provide that picture for you. So everybody's on that same playing field. So it's really important that you're controlling what you can control. baseball is the sport that probably sets you up the best for it and learning how to just roll with the punches. And so being able to control the effort that you put into this is just the most important aspect in my personal opinion. So making sure that you are taking ownership of this process and really just starting to put that process in motion right now is a crucial step to take this fall and winter and leading into the spring and next summer and then the fall after that. Proactivity cannot be said enough.
And one thing here too is we get this question quite a lot. We got on a webinar last night. Guys, when do you think, you know some coaches, when do you think the NCAA dead period is going to end? When are things going to go back to normal? I am surprisingly not a public health expert. I am also not, in deep with the NCAA. I don't know when the dead period is going to end. College coaches don't know when the NCAA dead period is going to end. And so the key point right now, the only way to set yourself up for success is to keep doing what you are able to do. There's nothing else that you have an advantage or insight into. There's nothing else that you can control, right? It's the key to baseball, right? Control the controllables. Right now, the controllables that you have are doing everything that you can do, that you are able to do. And then when things open back up, great. Then you take advantage of all those opportunities that come fresh there. But for now, it's just, how do I advance right now with the world the way it is right now and taking advantage of those opportunities? Now we're going to work into coach communication more explicitly. I know we touched on this a little bit earlier, and Jed did a great job kind of touching on this. This is such an important piece that we also wanted to give it its own segment in the agenda to talk in more depth as well. And there's a couple keys to success here that we're gonna talk about. I'm going to pull out some other slides from some partners that we work with as well. The first key that I would highlight that we point to is efficiency. It can be really tough to streamline communication, both for a student athlete and for a college coach, right? College coaches are getting thousands of emails. Student athletes are emailing all of their different target schools. So when I talk to families, one thing that I always recommend is use a sports recruits book. We partner with a company called Sports Recruits. So if you've come to a camp with us this summer, you have a free Sports Recruits profile. If you don't know the password, they can sort it out for you. But use the Sports Recruits profile to consolidate your most up-to-date information, have all your video, have all your academic information, your contact information all in one place. Another key part to being efficient here is identifying your list of target schools. You can't send, as Jed mentioned, the importance of personalizing those emails. You can't send highly personalized emails to all 3,500 college baseball programs in the country. There just isn't enough time. You need to identify your target list of schools to the 30, 40, or 10, 15, wherever you are in the process, so that you are able to dedicate the time, energy, and resources that you need to each one of those touch points. To dive in on each one of these a little bit more, the reason that I think using an online profile like Sports Recruits can help you and also help coaches is we've all been on those email chains, especially recently, where there's like an attachment from 6 emails ago that you have to update with the one that you just sent, and there's some information from March that has your SAT score, whatever it is, right? When you put all your information in one place on a Sports Recruits profile, you know that all of the information that you are sending to coaches, all you have to do is you send a single link to a coach, and you know that everything there, everything that they're going to access is up to date. You don't have to go back and say, gosh, did I send Coach Corbin my quarter 2 grades or my quarter 3 grades? Did I send him the March video, or did I send him the April video? Right? It's all done for you. As long as you keep this one landing page up to date, then you know that everything you're sending coaches is the right information. It's up to date. And you don't have to worry. You can reinvest that time of looking for your 2015 transcript. You can reinvest that time in writing really well-crafted emails to college coaches. The other thing this creates is a single landing page, one-stop shop for everything that a coach needs to know about you. It hosts your contact info. It hosts your social media handles if you want it to. It hosts your SAT score, your transcript. It has a built-in video editor that we'll touch on in a little bit as well. Having coaches go to a single place to get all that information streamlines their experience so that it's really convenient for them to do it, which for better or for worse, that's what you're trying to create. You're trying to make sure that they look. One good way to do that is to make it really easy for them to look. To give a sense of it, I'm going to pull these slides over. I stole them unabashedly from our contacts over at Sports Recruits. Here is what kind of like, now they're a tech company, so they have this nice moving, this GIF on the screen that I wasn't able to do. Here's what kind of a Sports Recruits profile looks like. You can put as much information on here as you want. Academic honors, you see there, the contact info, have a photo, have a bio, it has your hometown, all this stuff that coaches want to need or want to know about you. Really crucially, and something that one of the two things that I really, really love about the Sports Recruits platform is their video functionality. So instead of having all these different videos and clips live in different places, some on YouTube, some in your Huddle profile, some on Vimeo, some on your phone, you can upload them all into a single place and have just a stack of all your videos, whether it's, you can create one highlight reel, which we'll talk about in a second, or you can have, here's my game footage from March, here's my showcase video from April, here's my game footage from July, and you can have this kind of library of videos that coaches can go through to consult. The other thing that they've done is they've made video editing really easy. I am by no means a videographer, but what you can do is you can upload a video and then trim it and put some together. Now, they started with lacrosse, so there's a lot of lacrosse footage that you see on the screen. I apologize. But it's really, really easy to create a highlight reel of your best swing, your best pitch, your best ground ball that lives at the top of your home page or the top of your profile page, and then you have the rest of the video kind of live below it. So it's just a really easy way to create some things that can be really, really tough to do otherwise without some of these tools. They've already done a lot of the hard work in terms of coding this, so you don't need to, and that makes your life a lot easier. The other thing that we talked about is selecting your list of schools and identifying the schools that could be the right fit for you, right? So how do you start to narrow and build your school list, right? There's 3,500 baseball programs in the country. How do you find the ones that you're going to learn more about? The way that I start when I work with families to do this is you really have to start around qualities. You have to say, okay, what is I know myself enough to know something about what I think is going to set me up for success and for a positive college experience. What are the qualities that I'm thinking about? Do I want to be in a city? Do I want to be just outside of a city? Do I want to be really far away from a city? Do I not care? Do I want to be close to home? Do I want to be far away from home? Does it not matter to me? What's the size of the school that I'm thinking of myself in? What is the average class size? Like when I have a class in high school that has 30 kids, do I feel like I need more individual meetings with the teachers to be successful? Whereas if I'm in a seminar class of 10 or 15 kids, I feel better about my academic experience, right? All these different qualities are going to impact your experience on campus much more than the name of the school or the league that it's in or the division of baseball that they play. So I start from the qualities and then start to build a list that way. The other thing, functionality-wise, that Sports Recruits does have, and then we'll turn it back to kind of more head first and recruiting programming, is this school search function. So if you're only looking at schools, if you say, I want, and this is in my dummy profile account, but if you say, I want to go to schools within, 100 miles of home, or if I want to only look at schools that are on the West Coast, and academically, I'm looking, I'm a pretty good student, so I'm looking at the most selective schools or more selective schools. Sorry, my computer's functioning a little bit slowly here. I'm looking at the most selective and the more selective because I know that that's the type of student I am. Major-wise, I'm looking at, let's say I'm looking at education, maybe something within psychology. I want to kind of clinical psychology maybe, or I'm thinking about maybe sociology, political science. Great. I can start to filter based on all these qualities: location, size, academics, athletic level, to get a sense of what these schools are. So I selected some, now I can get a sense of what are the schools that fit my list. And you start to get a sense of, okay, where are they and what are the schools that might fit these qualities academically, size-wise that I'm looking for. So that's one kind of quick and easy way. Again, Sports Recruits has done the work for you, so kind of take advantage of all the back-end research that they've done on all these programs rather than you starting from scratch at the Princeton Review Guide. Jed, I'd love to turn it over to you to talk about a bit more on the coach communication piece with starting with personalizing every touch point.
So, and it's something that we've, kind of spoken to a little bit previously, but just making sure that you are doing the research and that you've done a pretty deep dive into each school. And so the more that you can express genuine interest, and you'll hear me keep saying that, just being able to portray to these coaches, and it should be genuine interest that you have in the school, and wanting to learn more, finding unique ways to be able to bring that out in the touch points that you have with these coaches can be a significant difference maker. Being able to show that you've looked up the school and you're wanting to learn more. So think of it, just a classic example would be if you know what you want to study in school already. Let's say you wanted to study medicine, you can, very easily go to that particular school's roster and look up the majors of the student athletes that are currently on the roster and see how many are studying medicine. And then that's a touch point that you can bring up to the coach. And coach, I saw that these guys are studying medicine. That's something I'm interested in studying at your school as well. Like, would you be able to connect me with them? I'm curious to hear more. That's just one example, but finding ways to express that genuine interest can really, really make you stand out and show, as we were also talking about earlier, just that character, and a little bit more about who you are. So that's just something to keep in mind. And certainly proofreading is very important, underrated without a doubt. Making sure that you have, of course, the coach's name correct. That is certainly key. But just in general, making sure that everything is neat, tidy, spelled correctly, good punctuation. It's the little things and just a nice, clean touch point to make sure that you're standing out and getting that side of it correct as well. And that kind of leads me into the email touch point in general. I know Max was talking about an email plus a little bit earlier, but for your emails, just making sure that you're still highlighting your strengths. It's just really important to do that. Think of it starting with the subject line. You want to make sure that, you're able to get your key points across in terms of who you are, things like your grad year, for example, or GPA, or that objective measurement that you've been working on that is your highlight tool, whatever it might be. Just making sure that you are highlighting your strengths in addition to personalizing each email. So if, there's certainly instances where, there's lots of players that are reaching out to these coaches. Coaches have hundreds, if not thousands of emails that they are receiving from interested student athletes. So the more you can do to make sure that you're standing out and that your message is getting across in a clear and legible fashion that has all of that relevant information, that still even, that email itself is still efficient to the point where you are getting your point across and expressing that genuine interest, highlighting your strengths all right there in just a nice, easy fashion is just a really important piece of this puzzle right now, whether that is your first email to a coach or it could even be an update to a coach. Whatever it is, you want to make sure that you're organized in your thoughts. Everything is really easy to navigate and view from a coach's standpoint, highlighting your strengths and still knowing what you want to get out of that email that you are sending along to the coach, making sure that they have everything that you need and you're still getting your point across, expressing that interest and knowing what you want to get in response from that email. There are also other ways to make sure that you are standing out to coaches too. There's certainly other ways to do it as well. Something that we've seen more and more of is the social media side of things, and that's, not for everybody. Certain student athletes use that avenue more than others, and that's okay. Social media does present that opportunity for you to build your own brand and make sure that you're able to keep your highlights updated, for instance, but not necessarily how everybody does it, which is okay. But it is a different avenue and a different type of touch point that you can use with these coaches. Twitter, for example, Instagram, whatever it might be, that is something that's out there. But a true way to stand out would be a handwritten letter to coaches. That is something that they don't receive a lot of. And so certainly a way to stand out. I think that, the handwritten letter itself is an exceptional touch point to have after you've created a relationship with the coach. I think that is just such a way to stand out, and it's so appreciated taking the time to write the note. From your standpoint as a student athlete, the time it takes to do it is not very much, but the message that portrays, taking the time to do it and paying that little fee for the stamp goes a very, very long way. I think it works as an introduction, but certainly if you have already established a relationship with a coach, just a very, very easy and strong way to make sure that you are standing out.
And I think that both these, like the highly personalized email and some of these more these more kind of heavier lift touch points, I think can help because coaches want to see interest from a student athlete, right? They don't want to go chase every kid who may or may not be interested in their program. They want to indicate an interest from the student athlete. And taking the 10 or 15 minutes to do the research and write that thoughtful email, or the 15 minutes to handwrite that note, look up the address for the athletic department, find the baseball office, put that stamp, find a mailbox. It's an investment of time, and it's a really easy, if nothing else, it's a really easy signifier of, I took this time, coach, to do these things. Therefore, I'm at least that interested in your program. And one thing that Jed mentioned that I don't think we can say enough is if you are sending out emails to a lot of college coaches and you aren't getting any responses, chances are pretty good that they're not personalized enough, or they're coming across as too generic to coaches. So when in doubt, personalize. Think about, what is the research that I can do on this school to indicate that I've spent some time on their website? What are the questions I can ask to show that this email was only written for Coach Todd Carroll at MIT, and it was not written for Caltech, even though I'm interested in both schools. Really tailoring that communication is more likely to prompt that response as well. We're now headed into the Q&A portion, and I do know we're coming up on the promised time, and I want to be respectful of everybody's evening. We're going to stick around and answer the Q&A and answer any questions that come in for as long as we need to, as long as there is anybody willing to ask us questions or that has them. We are going to be here willing to answer them. But if you have to dip off this webinar, if you have to go make dinner, or you have a meeting, or whatever the case may be, feel free to dip off, and if you have a question, just fire it into that questions box, and we'll be following up with you over the next couple of days personally, as well as with the recording of this webinar. So don't feel like you're going to miss out on anything. If you do have a question now, or that came up over the course of this, you can type it in that questions tab, hit send. I'm going to be addressing some over chat. We're also going to, Jed and I are going to kind of tag team answering them live to the audience as well. And Jed, as I start to compile some of those questions, could you talk a little bit about some of the upcoming events that we have?
Sure. And so we do have 2 Showcase Plus events that will be coming up pretty soon here. First off, we're going to be down in Florida on December 12th and 13th in Lakeland, and then we are jumping out west to Tucson just after the new year on the 2nd and 3rd of January. And these Showcase Plus events are tying together a lot of the things that we've talked about already tonight. And so our Showcase Plus events in general are combining certain pieces of what we've talked about. So you are going to have access to college coaches in person at these Showcase Plus events. They are going to be non-Division I coaches because this is a dead period compliant event. So there will be non-Division I coaches in attendance with us for both of these events coming up. And the way the Showcase Plus event works itself is a 2-day event where you are going to come and get video and advanced data analytics through Rapsodo and Blast Motion recorded on you for the offensive showcase. And for the pitching showcase, we will use Rapsodo as well. There is organic opportunity to interact with the college coaches that are in attendance as well. We will have a coach-led practice on the first day of camp and a dedicated meet and greet period for you to introduce yourself to any coach and have these conversations that we've been talking about having with them. this evening so far. You'll have that dedicated time to introduce yourself and have those conversations on site in person. But the way the showcase itself works, we have our defensive showcase, which is filmed by our video partner NextPro. We have our offensive showcase, which is filmed by Head First, and you are going to receive, leaving camp, the Rapsodo data, blast motion data, and the offensive showcase video. We'll transition into our pitching showcase, where we'll use Rapsodo as well. Again, the pitchers that participate in that will receive that Rapsodo data leaving camp, as well as the pitching showcase video filmed by us. We're going to move along into that coach-led practice and then wrap with that dedicated meet and greet. So that's a little bit of what day one looks like. And then, importantly, on day two is gameplay. And so we are going to have each student athlete playing 2 games. And importantly, every single pitch that is thrown during the games on day 2 is going to be cut and tagged to each individual student athlete. And so that, at the end of camp, is compiled to you. So everything from day 1, everything from day 2 is compiled and tagged, individualized to each student athlete, which is very important because the way we compile this together for coaches is a database that allows coaches to easily sort and find, what specifically they're looking for. They can sort by grad year. They can sort by GPA and test scores if you have them. They can sort by various objective measurements to know what they need, by your position. And then it is also going to link out to all of your videos. So your defensive showcase, offensive showcase, pitching showcase, or the gameplay video. Every single coach in our database of over 200 schools is going to receive access to everything from camp. You certainly will be able to walk away from camp with a lot to share with coaches outside of our network as well, or follow up with them on. But importantly, knowing that by attending an event like this, you are going to have everything shared with our entire college coach database of over 200 schools.
Awesome. Thank you, Jed. And there are a lot of really good questions that have come in. Like I said, we're going to stick around and answer them for as long as we need to. If after this, or if you have to go and you have plans, if you still have questions about your individual recruiting process, certainly not the only or last chance you have to get those questions answered. Feel free to shoot us an email. Give us a call. You'll probably be talking with either Jed or myself, for better or for worse. You can also check out our blog, which has some good articles on, kind of general next steps and where am I in the recruiting process, et cetera. And then our Twitter and Instagram handles as well, where we kind of post some of those contents as well as some interviews and stuff that we've done with coaches. We did one with Chris Gordon recently, the Duke assistant coach, about how they use data in their recruiting process. We did one with Kyle Decker, who was at Harvard at the time, talking about how they use Blast in their program for player development. So take a look at some of these resources. And now we're going to turn over to the Q&A. I asked for some patience. I'm going to be reading these and also answering some of them as they come in. Jed, one that piggybacks directly into what you were just talking about with the event is, what does that direct digital access for the coaches who can't be there in person? What does that direct digital access mean for the Showcase Plus? What does that look like for coaches who aren't able to attend that camp?
Very good question. So I was kind of speaking to it and happy to elaborate on it in a little bit more detail. So the direct digital access side of the Showcase Plus is that all college coaches in our database, so over 200 schools, are going to receive information on every single student athlete from camp in one centralized location. And so it is individualized. Everything from camp is individualized to you. And so that is going to include all of your contact information, all of your academic information, all of the objective measurements recorded on you from camp, and then also a link out to your video from camp as well, of the offensive showcase, defensive showcase, pitching showcase, and of course the gameplay footage is also shared with our entire college coach database as well. So coaches have the ability to sort and filter that database based off of their own program's needs, or looking for objective measurements that stand out to them, academic information for the student athletes that would be a fit for their program. So it's just an easy to navigate and filter database that coaches have access to not only view the first time they receive access to it, but to also be able to look back on as well as, time progresses. Max, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that?
No, I think that's really good. And again, this is to some degree where having an objective measurement can help you. One thing that I'm going to say to our enrolled families next week on our pre-camp webinar is, thinking about what that thing is, because a lot of coaches will look at that spreadsheet database, and whatever the tools that they're looking for, they might go to that first. And so if you're able to raise or get your name highlighted with that 60 or that batted ball velocity or whatever it is, if you're able to get your name highlighted, so then they click in and watch all of this other really complete data on you. That's another thing that we are advising as well. So there's a lot of really good questions here. The one that I'm going to start with is, right now, and this question, this asker specifically asked about the Ivy League. I'm going to generalize this a bit more broadly because it's true of a lot of schools. So do high academic schools, a lot of high academic schools have gone test optional for the 2020 admission cycle, as well as in a lot of cases the 2021, even the 22 or 23 admission cycle, due to limited access to tests over the last few months and honestly projected through the coming months as well. So given that a lot of these schools are test optional right now, do these high academic schools still want to see or need to see SAT or ACT scores from 2022 grads before they'll make offers? Now, this is a bit of a complex answer. The short answer is no. The longer answer is maybe, and it might help. So coaches cannot, to my understanding, have different admission standards for recruited student athletes than they can for the general student body. So if the general student body is going to be test optional, then recruited student athletes can also be test optional. They can apply without submitting a test score. But as coaches, especially with student athletes who might not have that complete 3-year transcript yet, so the class of 2022 currently, you don't have that academic record just by virtue of time that shows as robust a transcript, right? You don't have 3 full years of a high school transcript to give an admissions office or a coach as good a view into you academically. So in that case, it could help you if you think you can pop a pretty good score on the ACT or SAT. It could help you open up some of those doors for coaches. If you're able to say, hey coach, here's my 2.5-year high school transcript, but I also got a 32 on the ACT, then they might be more willing to continue that, as opposed to, this 2.5-year transcript looks really good. I am going to need to see that 3-year before we really start to talk turkey about what comes next in your recruiting. So it's a bit of a complex answer. If you're a good test taker and you have access to a test, I think that there's certainly no harm in taking the SAT, taking the ACT, other than that, pretty terrible 6 or 7 hours on that Saturday in a high school gym. But other than that, there's not a whole lot of negatives to it in your admissions. But at schools that are test optional, if you're not a strong test taker, or if that is not a part of your toolkit, then a lot of these schools going test optional could ultimately really benefit you. But being able to have that score might make coaches more comfortable making concrete strides in their recruiting with you earlier. It's not going to do everything. It's not going to completely change the picture, but it might make them a little bit more friendly to move along with things a little bit earlier in the process. Jed, anything to add there?
You said it well, Max.
Awesome. Appreciate that. I try. All right. What is the expected recruiting timeline for 2022s who are going through the high academic process now? When will these high academic Division I's, Division III's, when will we start to see them make some offers? Jed, I'd love to kick this over to you to kind of see, what we see normally, and then also kind of maybe thinking through how we project this to work into the 2022 class, given all the various complexities and curveballs there.
Yeah, I think it's going to vary school by school in terms of, how it's going to be working for them specifically. Typically the Division I school in a normal year, the Division I recruiting process does tend to skew a little bit younger, meaning that they are looking for younger student athletes, or just on a more advanced timeline than the Division III schools. That's typically what we see, but not to say by any means that Division III schools aren't recruiting younger. It's simply that we typically see their timelines of when the offers are made are just a little bit later from a D3 standpoint. And I think it's going to vary, based off of several factors in terms of where the schools are right now, and what you can expect their timelines to be looking like in terms of making offers to student athletes. Factors in terms of who's at the school right now, where they are in terms of just positions and what they're looking for and what those timelines are like. And I really think it's just going to be varying based off of the school in terms of their needs and their timeline for everything. Max, I'm curious just for your specific thoughts, if you have additional insight. Obviously, it varies program by program, but I'm curious just to toss it to you in terms of what you think about it.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think that last thing you said is absolutely key, right? It will vary program by program. The thing that we see with high academic schools is, as I mentioned earlier, it would be really tough for, an Ivy League coach or a Patriot League coach or an SCAC coach to say, hey, dear admissions officer, here's my incoming recruiting class, here's their 9th grade and 10th grade transcript, right? That does not give the admissions officer enough to work off of. And so there is this high academic slowdown that we typically see, where typically some high academic Division I schools will start to make offers with 2.5 years of a transcript. So in, let's say, January of this year, you'll start to see some Ivy Patriot League type commits. There might be some earlier if they already had a stellar standardized test score. They already had an incredible transcript as well. But really 2.5 years is usually around the minimum. But then where you see a flurry of commitments at those high academic Division Is is really usually May and June following the junior year. But that doesn't mean that they're all done by then either. I think it's a really heavy recruiting process for rising seniors going into their senior year. So May through September of senior years are really, really key time for Division Is and Division IIIs, the high academic standpoint. As you had mentioned, it does certainly differ by each one. And I think that, it differs by student athlete as well. If they really like you on the field and you have some really good grades, then they might start to move with you, a little bit earlier. And it depends on each school's relationship with their admissions office as well. But there is kind of generally that slowdown that, different at a Mississippi State or an Arkansas than it is at a Harvard or even a Vanderbilt to some degree, or a Duke for that matter. So it does differ for those high academic schools, certainly. A couple questions about kind of the extension of the dead period that I'm going to try to roll into one. We're going to see. The one question was from someone who hopped on a little bit late. Do we think the dead period will be extended? Is one side of it, which we'll talk about first. Follow up or kind of tag along with Division I schools not being able to see players until after January 1st currently, where the dead period currently stands. Are most D1s just stopping recruiting, or do you think it will open up again after January 1st and into the spring? So to address that first one, I have no idea, unfortunately, if the dead period is going to be extended again or not. I think that personally, please don't hold me to this. I know this is being recorded, but please don't quote me back to myself later. I do think that it's probably better than a coin flip that the dead period will be extended through at least part of the spring. That's just kind of my instinct looking at how things are going. So right now it's scheduled to end with the new year. I think it probably will be extended, but that remains to be seen. As Jed mentioned when we were talking earlier about kind of the proactivity piece, Mark Emmert right now, the president of NCAA, he probably doesn't know yet if the NCAA is going to extend that dead period or not, right? There's a lot of things at play that dictate that. The only thing that student athletes can do is control what they can control and take advantage of the opportunities that they do have in front of them. Stay proactive, attack what you can, but not worry too much about what might happen in the future until it happens. So take advantage of the opportunities that you have now, and then once things do open up, whether that is on January 1st, as it's currently slated, or whether it's on April 1st with an extension of the dead period, take advantage of everything that opens up when it does. In terms of that second question of are coaches stopping recruiting until the dead period ends, No, I really don't think that they are. Kind of part and parcel of that last thing that I was mentioning about the high academic slowdown, that does not mean that coaches are not actively recruiting players until June after their junior year, right? It's never too early to get on a coach's radar, to get on their recruiting list, because they are absolutely building out their lists of 2022s, 2023s, even 2024s in some cases for the kids that they are interested in, who they're going to kind of track and follow over the years. So just because they aren't able to get off campus, we haven't seen that. Once coaching staffs adapted their efforts to the digital side of things, to focus a lot on video and data and analytics, once they got comfortable with that, I think that the dead period hasn't really slowed down their recruiting efforts, either with the 2021s or also with the 2022s after that initial kind of pause. They are still building out their list of 2022s. There are almost certainly offers out to 2022s. There are recruiting boards that are jam-packed with 2022 grads currently in offices as coaches wait to see what comes about next. Another kind of follow-up question on that actually was, will coaches need to see players in person before they commit them? In a normal year, I would say yes. I would say coaches usually do. You know, in the vast majority of cases, they do want to see players in person before they commit them. Right now, though, that looks different, obviously. And so there are coaches who have absolutely committed players without seeing them play in person on the basis of video and data and more video and more data and meeting the player over Zoom and having, long phone calls with them. It's not the coach's ideal. And as you mentioned earlier, they still need to be just as comfortable with you as a player and with you as a human and with you as a holistic student athlete before they make that commitment. But they are finding other ways to build that comfort through digital avenues. And so right now, coaches are not able to wait to see somebody in person before they make a decision on them, especially at the D1 level, because they can't afford to wait on some of these, 21s or 22s right now. Jed, one question coming in. What schools will be attending that December showcase in Florida that you mentioned that could actively be looking in kind of the 2021 and 2022 class? And then which of those schools have filled their recruiting slots? So what are the prospects like right now and at that Florida camp for some of our 2021s, and what are the schools that are going to be there generally, and where might they sit with their recruiting classes for 21s and 22s?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, just to start off with the schools that you can expect to see, you'll see schools from Amherst through Carleton, Hendrix, MIT, Johns Hopkins, Rhodes, Swarthmore, just to name a few of the types of schools. Worcester is another one that you can expect to see. So, about 12 to 15 schools are who's going to be down there with us. And in terms of what those coaches are looking for, you heard me say it a little bit earlier, but in terms of where they are with their own recruiting process, it'll depend on the school in terms of where they are. I think that at some of the schools that we'll have in person, there's certainly an opportunity for 2021 graduates to still be recruited. I think there is that possibility of that. I think, reaching out to these coaches as well in advance of camp to make sure that you're establishing a relationship before you see them on site in person is always something, that we'd recommend to do. And of course, just express, like we've talked about, that genuine interest in advance and just how excited you are to get out in front of them. From a 2022 standpoint, certainly I believe these schools in attendance are going to be actively recruiting 2022s. Some may have a better idea than others in terms of what that class is looking like at this point in time. And I think that the opportunities are out there for all these schools that are in attendance with us. And at the end of the day, I think the most important thing that, you can be doing is being direct with these schools as well. And as you express that genuine interest and, you can ask those hard-hitting questions once they have a chance to see you play in terms of how you fall and compare to the other student athletes that they're actively recruiting. And, sometimes it won't be as fun, certainly to hear that a school may or may not be interested in you, but it'll help you to navigate this process and be able to narrow your focus down towards other schools as well. So I think being as direct as you can with these coaches and expressing that interest, but also seeing where you fall. And once you send video along to them, being able to get the feedback from them is really important. I think it's really, really important because it just allows you to continue moving forward, hopefully with them. But of course, even if it's the news that you don't want to hear, you still get something really important out of that as well.
I think that's exactly right, Jed. I think that especially for 2021s, it is really a time to be direct and kind of be a detective in your recruiting process. Where you need to say, hey, coach, I'm really interested in X school. Are you interested in me? As Jed said, the answer to that question could be yes or it could be no. The no is always going to hurt. The yes is always going to feel great. But they both are a gift because they both help you move forward in your recruiting process. If you're stuck in limbo not knowing what your prospects at a certain school might be, you're unable to move on to the next school. You're unable to move forward in your recruiting process effectively because you just don't know what it might be. To that point as well, though, you have to be able to get comfortable asking some of these questions. The other thing that I think sometimes escapes student athletes who are going through the process is there's a lot of different finish lines, right? Some of the more recent finish lines have kind of come and gone. Like if you look at, everybody focuses on early signing period, right? Everybody wants that photo op in their high school gymnasium, wearing the college t-shirt and the hat on the table, and they're signing that document, right? Everybody wants that. That is the November 1st or 15th deadline. I'm committing early to a school. That's one of the deadlines. That's one of the finish lines for this. It's the first one. It's the one that gets the most publicity and the most social media likes, but it's not the only one. There is plenty of life after November 15th in the recruiting process. I can get in with support, possibly after some conversations with coaches. I can get support in the regular admission cycle, or there's also life after the regular admission cycle as well. It requires a bit more work, and it requires very open and honest communication with college coaches, where you can say, hey, coach, I know you can't support me early decision. Is there a chance that I might be supported depending on how things shake out with your recruiting regular decision? If the answer to that, it can be yes or no. Then if it's a no, then you say, okay, coach, I'm still really interested in Haverford. If I apply without your support and I get in on my own, what's my status? Could I have a roster spot? Would I have a spring tryout? Would I have a fall tryout? Would I be a recruited walk-on? Asking these questions as you work further down on the funnel timeline-wise is really important. And the answer to any one of them could be yes or it could be no, but there's kind of this branching decision tree that can take you down to finding a good outcome. And I think it's important to understand that there is life after early decision, and there is life as recruited and pure walk-ons in a lot of these programs as well. It's just really important, if that is the path that you're going, it's important to communicate effectively with college coaches so that you know what you're walking into. If you think that if you get in on your own, you're going to have a guaranteed roster spot, and it turns out you have a 2-day fall tryout, that is going to hurt. But if you go in eyes wide open, knowing that, hey, nothing's guaranteed when I show up on campus in September, but I'm going to get a shot at the team, great. Then you can make the decision on where you end up matriculating with kind of all the cards on the table. A great, very specific question. When I send an email to a coach, what should the subject of the email be? Jed, I'd love your take on this.
Yeah, I think it's the highlights that we were speaking about earlier. It's making sure that they're getting, they know exactly what they're going to be expecting when they click into the email itself. It should be eye-catching in itself. It should be name, grad year, GPA, the important academic information that's relevant, but still making sure it's your highlights as well. Of course, if there's objective measurements, that can be included in that as well. Making sure it is worthy of reading more is my best advice, and just making sure that that's your highlight, and whatever those specific highlights are for you is what I would recommend including in a subject line. Just making sure, I think no matter what, your grad year is an important thing to put in there, but that's my personal opinion. But I just do think it's highlighting those highlights, and hopefully making that coach want more and read into what's next. And I think, of course, tied into that is going to be including everything that we talked about in terms of that genuine interest, the data, and the video as well. Max, curious for your thoughts on that as well in terms of what you would include.
Yeah, so in the subject, I struggle with this, to be honest. I write a lot of our marketing emails, and if you've seen them, I'm sure you've seen that maybe the subject lines don't work on some of those. I think that with a communication with college coaches, I think don't try to get too cute. I think that be pretty direct, include your name, include your grad year, and say video included or something that's going to make them click in to know that there is more information in there. And I think that saying something like Max McKenna 2022 video is going to let them know, like, okay, there's something in here that I can look. It's not just a general interest email. Going hand in hand with that, and I think that this is one that it drives me bonkers, and I think that it escapes a lot of players. What is the email address that you are sending these emails from? Because it definitely shouldn't be mom or dad's email, and it definitely shouldn't be the email that you created as your AOL Instant Messenger screen name when you were in 4th grade that's like Red Sox rules with 6 Z's, right? It should be something along the lines of your name, maybe include your grad year if your name is just taken, but think about not just what is the subject line, but what is the whole package of what I'm putting in, Coach JP Pine's inbox. If he gets an email from this absurd email address that was not written by a high schooler, but was written by a 3rd grader once upon a time, and it has, things spelled wrong and my favorite band from 10 years ago, maybe that's not going to put across the best impression of me right off the bat. So going hand in hand with the subject line is I would create a dedicated email inbox just for your coach communication if you're going to handle it over email, because then you can control what that username is. It also means that it doesn't get lost in the spam of everyday life as well. It can be your school email address, certainly, if that's what you use the most, but it should be something that presents your brand effectively or presents who you are effectively, doesn't give a bad first impression, and also that you check regularly so that you don't lose sight of some things in your inbox as well. Jed, some of the coaches that this player has been communicating with, they say that they're just getting started with the 2022s. Is that true? Is that a general blow-off statement? Like, when we think about coaches who are communicating with 2022s, that sounds about right? That they're kind of just starting in on this class.
Yeah, I think from a timeline perspective, that could make total sense. Obviously, as I keep saying, it depends on the program in terms of where they are, but I think that would make sense for certain schools to just start to get rolling with their 2022s for where they are right now. And I think, take that for what it is and make sure that you are having those conversations with those coaches and keeping them up to date with your updates. As we've talked about earlier, is, make sure you're acquiring what you can acquire right now in terms of footage and data to be able to share with them, and then set that timeline in motion for those logical updates to be able to follow up with these coaches on. So if they are just beginning with 2022s, then okay, take that as it is, and make sure that you are, if that's a school that's on your list, that you are keeping in contact with that coach. That would mean if they responded to you that there's a relationship established, and so making sure that you are keeping up with that coach and providing those logical updates that we've been going through, I think is just really, really important to make sure that you're staying on top of. But I do think from a timeline perspective that would make sense for certain programs.
No, absolutely. And I think especially for high academic programs, as we've been talking about, they do have a bit more of a slowdown, right? I am positive that some of the, Power 5 schools reached out on September 1st to 2022s to make some of those commitments, quite honestly. But for high academic schools, it's very, very possible, even probable, that they're just starting in on their 2022 class, because this recruiting cycle has looked differently. So they're probably a little bit delayed in finishing off their 2021s, even for some of those Division I schools. And so they're now just working into that 2022 class. Now, when I say they're working into that class, it means that they're starting to really think about critically and build out that recruiting board and start to communicate with players. but it also means that they have some 2022s on their radar from this past summer, from the summer before, from last winter, whatever the case may be that they are starting in on. So whether or not even if you talk to a school that says, look, we're not reaching out to 2022s right now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's too early to get on their radar and get them video and get them data and get them your transcripts so that when they are actively looking, you're right at the top of the list, right at the top of the funnel as well. Jed, after I send the initial kind of intro email to coaches that I'm interested in, what should help inform the updates that I send to coaching staff from then on? Like, what should I include as I continue to develop and as I continue to build that relationship?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I think, first let me say the timeline could vary in terms of, I wish I had a particular timeline to say, after X number of days, send your follow-up. I unfortunately don't have that answer, but I think in terms of what that update is to provide, it's kind of going back to whatever that key feature of yours is. But it could really depend. If you just took the SAT and you got your scores back, I think that's a logical update to provide. If you've been working on your 60-yard dash and you've taken a couple tenths off of your 60, I think that's a good update to provide. If your exit velo has jumped up a few miles per hour off of a tee or whatever it might be, that's a nice update to provide. So I think it's taking what your initial outreach is and assessing what you were promoting most within that and what your key features are, and then knowing what you're working on after you send that email and just providing the update if you have it in terms of where you're at now. And then you just keep building off of that and keep building off of that. And I think making those logical updates over time is just a really easy way to stay in contact with these coaches, is having something to provide an update with, not just reaching out to them to just do it, but having something to provide them with. Or it could be the genuine interest side of things too. Maybe you don't have an updated 60-yard dash time to provide them, but you thought of a question when you were researching the school some more, and you have just a question about the program that you want to learn more about. So I think there's different updates that you can reach out with, but also knowing it doesn't necessarily need to be an athletic update that you are reaching out to the coach with to express that interest. It can be other things too.
Absolutely. And I think that the important piece about these updates as well is that like having content, new video, new exit velocity, whatever, new transcript, as Jed mentioned, that's a good reason to email a coach again. And as we said, persistence really is key in some of that coach communication. The other thing that I think it's important to keep in mind is every video you send, every time a coach sees you play live, they're getting a single snapshot into you as a player. And one thing that I think sometimes escapes student athletes and families in the recruiting process is coaches don't really care how you play today, except that it's a window into how you play in 3, 4, 5, 6 years once you're in their program, right? They're not recruiting the 16-year-old Jed Barkin. They're recruiting the 20-year-old Jed Barkin, who's going to be a contributing sophomore, junior on that team. So I think it's important to think about using these updates to give coaches different slices, developmental slices, so that they can track longitudinally and say, okay, here's where Max was in June before his junior year. Here's where he was in September of his junior year. Here he is in January. And they can start to plot out your development and get a sense of not just where you are now, a static view of who you are as a baseball player, but they can start to build the dynamic view and project that out forward. Because ultimately what they're recruiting is projectability. They're thinking, what does this kid do now? And what does that mean for his potential? And what is his ceiling as a baseball player? And do I think he's going to reach it? And then they're recruiting based on that. They want to know what your ceiling is, and they also want to know that you have the work ethic and the dedication to the game to reach that ceiling as well. Still about 10 or so questions left, so we're gonna keep hammering away on them. Maybe we can start to fold some together as well, but if you have them, keep firing them in as well. Jed, well, then I'm going to turn to you first. I did the Showcase Plus event in September in New York. Thank you for being there. Got that film that we mentioned. this student athlete plays basketball, assuming there'll be a season. How should he handle keeping in touch with coaches in the winter when he's not when he's playing another sport instead of being baseball year round? Like how can he use that data and video and touch points from September to help continue to advance the recruiting process through the off season as well?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think importantly, I think that, this is my personal opinion, college coaches like, well-rounded student athletes. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to shy away from the fact that you play other sports as well. I don't think that that's a bad thing just because, you play basketball. So that's showing that you're still working on your athleticism as well. So just an easy one, something that we recorded at camp would have been your vertical leap. I would imagine that you'll have an opportunity to make sure that you're improving upon that as basketball season comes around. So that's a logical update to be able to provide there. But I think it is, finding time when you are able to make sure that you are still working on the baseball side of things is important, just to make sure that you're staying in baseball shape as well. Certainly with the focus being on basketball, but by being able to have that data recorded from when you're able to join us in September, it's going to allow you still this time to make sure that you are, by the next time you get out in front of them, or by the next time you do provide that update in video, you can use your exit velocity if you're able to record that, for example, or just your footage where a coach may see that you've gained 5-10 pounds, whatever it might be, since they last saw you. There's other ways to show the progress that you're making aside from if you don't have the ability to join us for one of our upcoming events to get updated Rapsodo data, or you don't have it accessible as part of your travel program. There are other ways and other updates that you can be providing, showing your overall athleticism, and then also going back to the genuine interest side of things and making sure you're doing your research on the school and asking those types of questions and just continuing the conversation with those coaches. If you can dunk, maybe share a video of that. Just a different type of touch point, showing your overall athleticism with those coaches, and just making sure you are continuing the conversations, although you may not be number one focus of baseball at the time.
There was a follow-up. Apparently the student athlete can't dunk yet, but we're just going to say keep working on it. What are the best pieces of information to include to personalize an email to a coach? Great caveat here in this question, without getting too far in depth or making the email too lengthy, because it does still, I think, need to be pretty succinct and to the point. The things that I recommend in that initial outreach is find 2 or 3 points to personalize. The main ones is, why are you as a player interested in this school? Broadly, it's like, hey, Coach Noon, I'm really interested in Babson because I saw that you guys have a really good undergrad entrepreneurship program, and that's the direction that I think I want to head, right? Something academic, something unique about that school that really appeals to you. So I think that that's a really, really, really key one is, what about this school made you open your inbox, do some research about this school, learn more about it, love it even more, and fire off this email? Why are you interested in this school? The other one is, I think, in a normal year, I think that this applies a little bit less, but also personalize it to, if a coach had a really good season, or if a program had a really good season, if they made it to the conference championship or, went to the NCAA tournament, include that as well. Like, show them that you're following along with their on-field development as well. I think that those 2 key pieces in that intro email can personalize it effectively, but also can signify that general interest, but also still keep it pretty short and to the point. Then you have opportunities in follow-up communication to really, really dive down on some of that personalization. Say, hey, coach, I'm thinking about majoring in neurobiology. How do your student athletes balance heavy lab majors or heavy lab academics with the baseball play in season or something like that? So I think that starting general specific and then going very specific in some of that follow-up is what I generally advise here. Jed, one perfectly tailored for you. What is the optimum head first showcase for a 2023 student athlete? What should they pencil into their calendar to get the right exposure over the next, let's call it 18 months, 18 to 24 months?
Yeah. I think the ones that we have coming up are certainly a perfect opportunity. Given that you're a 2023 graduate before September 1st of your junior year, Division I schools would not necessarily have the opportunity to have a recruiting conversation with you, but the opportunity to acquire the advanced data analytics from a Showcase Plus event, to have that Rapsodo data and the Blast Motion data recorded on you as a 2023, plus the video right now, is going to allow you to begin to really provide an update for these coaches and continue this trajectory to show improvement over time. And as Max was saying a little bit ago, just being able to show the projectability as you continue to get older, grow, get bigger, faster, stronger. I think that the sooner the better. That is probably what we hear most from families is, I wish I would have come sooner. And I think it's valid, it's important, because the opportunity to start now, just as a baseline, I think provides an opportunity for you to make sure that you're putting yourself in the best position possible moving forward. Then again, you can also say next summer, of course, assuming the current climate improves, you will have an opportunity to get out in front of 90 plus coaches on Long Island, or whatever might be out west, 75 plus out west as well. And so that would be a perfect logical follow-up after coming to a Showcase Plus event, to be able to get back on site with them in person as well, to meet them in person and get a chance to play in front of them as well. So the timeline of the sooner the better is going to put you in the best position possible to make sure that you are moving forward in this process.
Are Division I schools able to come to the Arizona Showcase since the dead period will be over? We touched on this a little bit, but Jed mentioned that Arizona Showcase that we have, that's January 2nd and 3rd. Right now, the dead period is scheduled to end on January 1st. So theoretically, right now, they projected to be able to be there. And I will say, if we get indications from our college coach partners or from the NCAA, if they announce that the dead period is going to end as currently scheduled on January 1st, we will be doing outreach to some of those area Division I's to see if they're able to come out, and we will be adding them, to the site. We'll be staffing them. That will all of a sudden not be a Showcase Plus, because it will have some of those Division I's on site. However, as I mentioned, call me a pessimist, I am not super confident that the dead period is going to end on January 1st. And for the integrity of everything that we do here and the promises that we make to customers, we are not going to bill it as something that right now we're unable to do. I think that one thing that drives me absolutely bonkers about some other actors in the Showcase space is just a general kind of lack of integrity about their coach list and who is going to be on campus, who is going to be watching things that they're providing, what's going on there. And I think that one thing that we have for our 22 years of our operating Showcase camps, that's a hill that we'll die on. We will die on the integrity of our coach list. There are changes to it certainly sometimes based on last minute family issues or staffing issues or whatever the case is, but that's one that we feel really strongly about. And so we're not going to say, hey, we hope Division I schools can be there, and then all of a sudden, knowing full well that right now they wouldn't be able to be there. If it does open up, we will be reaching out to schools to staff it, but since they currently are unable to, that is not a promise that we're going to make to customers, not knowing if we're going to be able to hold up to it. Jed, you spoke a little bit about your travel ball experience, so I'd love for you to weigh in on this one. How important is it for student athletes to keep playing travel ball to get live reps during the dead period when if and when high school seasons are shut down? This person's tuning in from California, where I know things are looking a bit iffy on some of those. They just pushed back the fall and winter sports start dates, so I think that the high school sports looking a little bit iffy. How important is it for players to keep getting live reps during the dead period before they get exposure to some of these coaches?
Yeah, in my personal opinion, I do think live reps are important to make sure that you're getting. I think certainly you think of it also from an update standpoint in the recruiting process, is being able to acquire that type of footage, that gameplay footage, to be able to provide along to coaches as well. Just You can certainly sit in a cage and hit for hours, but making sure that you're able to track a ball coming in and put a good swing on it is certainly different. So I think that it's making sure that you're able to own in on the fundamentals is obviously exceptionally important to do, but then also making sure that you still are able to get those game reps in when possible, if possible, to do it, I think is an important piece just as we continue working through this. And that could be you and a buddy, if you are comfortable doing it, getting out to a field and having a pitcher throw to you or whatever it might be. Doesn't necessarily always need to be total live game, but just making sure you are getting those style of reps as well is very important, because once you are able to eventually down the road, hopefully get out in front of those coaches, it's, you want to have some comfort of it, if you're able to do so as you're working through all of this. So obviously there are restrictions in place and things that are outside of your control, but if it's within your control to get some type of live game reps, in my personal opinion, I think it's always great to try to make that happen.
Agreed. And one thing that I just remember that I said in a webinar back in March when all this was hitting was, as a relief pitcher my freshman year of college, the saying in the bullpen was be ready to get ready and stay ready to get ready, and it's hurry up and wait, right? And I think that applies somewhat to the player development side right now too. You don't necessarily know when the next on-field opportunity is going to be, but it's important right now to stay ready to get ready, right? So when that opportunity does open up, whether that's a travel ball thing or high school or a live in-person type exposure type event, you want to make sure that you have done everything within your control safely over the last couple months so that you're ready for that opportunity. Now, I put a big caveat on that, which is the most important thing you can do for your recruiting right now is stay healthy and stay safe. Within that parameter, the other most important thing you can do is to keep advancing the game of baseball, keep getting better at things, which to get better at the competitive game of baseball, one great way to do that is live reps and is competitive play. So if you're able to safely do that, yes, I certainly think that it can benefit, to echo Jed. Student athlete took the SAT and did pretty well, but plan to take the test again in the early spring. Should I communicate my test scores or wait to see if I do better? This does depend a little bit on grad year. I'm assuming this is from a 2022, just given the fact that otherwise you would have already applied to college. I think that if you're comfortable-ish with the test, I think since you took it early, if a 2022 already has a standardized test score, unless it's way lower than you expect to perform the next time you take it, there's no harm in communicating it. Because I think that what you can say to coaches is, hey, I took the ACT and I got X. I already have a date to take it again, and here's my prep course. I've been doing a lot of prep, so I think it's going to jump by 7 points or whatever the case is. You can communicate, here's what it is currently, because that gives coaches a little bit of a baseline, but then you can also say, but I'm already scheduled to take it again. I've been doing this prep course, and I think I'm going to do better. So you kind of set their expectation for, if you give them a baseline score, they have a floor, and they also have a little bit of a range of where it might come in at, right? If you took and you got a 27, they're not necessarily going to think, great, I need this kid to pop a 36, and I know from that 27 that I know he's going to get a 36, right? But they can say, all right, the lowest he's going to be when he applies to my school is 27, and I think that with what he just told me about his prep, I think he's probably going to shoot in the 30-31 range, right? They've seen a lot of kids take and retake ACT scores, and they know kind of what some of those parameters are. They're not going to see a kid jump 15 points in the ACT, but they oftentimes will see a kid jump 3 or 4, for example, so it can give them a little bit of a range there. Final question, because I do want to, we're now, I think, deeper into overtime than Clemson Notre Dame, and so I want to make sure that we're giving people a chance to get about their evenings as well. Like I said, if your question is still remaining at the end of this, and there are 1 or 2 that we might not get to, we'll follow up. Jed or I will follow up in the next 24 to 48 hours to talk through your question and anything else that came up as well. During the dead period, what is the best way to get a sense of a baseball program that I might be looking at, especially if we're lucky enough to get an offer and need to decide before we can visit the school in person? Jed, any thoughts here? Like, if you got an offer from Denison before you had been able to visit campus, what would your next steps be?
Yeah, that's a great question, and would certainly be a great position to be in, obviously, to have that offer sitting there for you. What I would try to do is do as many virtual style tours as I can to make sure I'm able to see as much of the campus as I can. And from there, I'd also personally, what I would want to do is connect with the student athletes that are there as well, to pick their brains and gain their perspective. Something that I was able to do when I was going through the process was, take a visit and get a chance to meet some of the guys that are there. And so I think trying to do that would be an important piece to me, would be getting a sense for the student athlete's perspective of everything as well, and trying to establish some type of relationships with them and pick their brains, just to make sure that it's going to be the right holistic fit for you for the next 4 years. I think that's an important piece to do. If you can't physically get there in person, think of the things that you'd want to do if you were there in person on site, and make sure that you're working your hardest to try to get those types of answers to the things that you'd want to be doing if you did have that opportunity. And that's probably the best advice I'd give, is try to sit back and think about what it is that you'd be looking to get out of the on-campus visit. Of course, seeing the campus itself, yes, would definitely play a role in that, but all the other factors that you'd be looking for as well.
Absolutely. That's a great one to end on, Jedi. Thank you all for being here. As I said, if you have any questions, if your question was left unanswered here, Jed or I will be reaching out in the next couple of days to address it. If you have any questions beyond that, or something that just occurs to you, we're going to be sending out the recording of this webinar in the next couple of days with some timestamps to kind of pick and choose your way around it. And also, always, please feel free to reach out to us over email, over the phone, on social media. Take a look at our blog, and feel free to consult some of those resources. Again, thank you all for taking the time this evening. We really appreciate the thoughtfulness, the great questions, and the attention. Thank you all.